In this tutorial, you'll learn about JavaScript. JavaScript is the third layer of the layer cake of web technologies, the first two being HTML and CSS. In previous tutorials, we've seen how HTML is used to define the structure of web pages and how CSS is used to style it. Well, JavaScript is what makes web pages interactive. Whenever a web page does anything other than display static content, JavaScript is probably involved. A few examples would be saving information a user inputs in the screen, send and receive chat messages, as well as interactive maps. All are made thanks to JavaScript. In this tutorial, we'll take a look at some basic concepts of JavaScript and computer science in general. We'll continue working with the page we built and styled in previous tutorials. If you haven't seen those, you can find the links in the description. Let's jump right in. JavaScript code lives in files that end in the JS extension. Let's create our first JavaScript file. Let's open a VS Code here and click Add New File. Let's name it scripts.js. And just like what we did with the styles file, we need to let our page know where this file lives. So let's open our index.html file. Let's add a new HTML element, script, to point to the location that contains our script. Let's use the HTML attribute src, short for source. And that would be script.js. We also need to add another attribute, defer. Don't worry too much about this for now. All it does is that it tells the computer to wait until the page is fully loaded until it loads the JavaScript file. We're now ready to start interacting with our page using JavaScript. The first thing I want to do is use JavaScript to update the header of our page. We'll first write the code, see it in action, and then explain it. I'm going to type this line of code here. And when we refresh the page, we see that our header has been updated to Commander James Bond. So let's actually come back and see what all of this means. Document here is what is known as a variable. In computer programming, variables are containers that store data. Here, the value that the variable document is storing is the whole web page. Query selector is what is known as a function. In computer programming, a function is a sequence of instructions that perform a specific task. The task that the function query selector is performing is selecting the first h1 element in our HTML document. We will look into functions in more detail later and even create our own. Functions often take input parameters. The input parameters determine how a function behaves and what output it produces. h1 here is an input parameter, and it tells the query selector function that we want an h1 element. If we were to pass p as an input parameter instead of h1, then the query selector function will return a paragraph. Text content is what is known as a property. It is a property of our h1 element. Think of a property as a characteristic of what it belongs to. For example, a person has a height property. The height property has a value. For example, 180 centimeters, 190 centimeters. A car has a make property. The value of this property might be Mercedes, BMW, Audi, etc. You get the point. We can retrieve the value of a property and we can set the value of a property. Here we are setting it to Commander James Bond using the equals operator. If we wanted to retrieve the value of the property instead, we can do something like this. Here we're not setting the value, but we are merely getting it or inspecting it. This of course has no visible effect. So to make it visible, we can use the alert function like this. And if we refresh the page, we see that we get an alert or a pop-up that says this page says James Bond. Alert is just another function that takes an input parameter and it displays the input parameter in the page as you've just seen. So as I was saying, here we're setting the value of text content using the equal operator to Commander James Bond. This semicolon here is used to terminate the instruction or statement. Basically, we're telling the computer we would like to stop processing this particular part of the code. Variables, functions, properties, and statements are a core part of every programming language. So let's look into those into a little bit more detail. Let's see about creating a variable of our own. Instead of updating the heading text like this, let's first create a variable. Let's call it my heading like this. We use the const keyword to declare a variable. We're telling the computer that we're creating a variable named my heading, and we want its value to be the output of this function, which is an h1 element in this case. We can then add another instruction that says my heading text content equals James Commander James Bond, and when we refresh the page we get the same result we got earlier. That's because we didn't actually change anything here. We just changed the way we're giving the computer the instruction. Another reason I created the variable is I wanted to change the color of the heading as well. To do so, let's write this instruction. My heading dot style dot color equals blue. Again, style here is the property of heading, and color is a property of style. So as you can see, we can change properties. Here we're saying we want to set the color property of the style, which is the property of the heading, to blue. And when we refresh the page, we see that indeed the style has been updated to blue. From this, we can see that one of the benefits of using a variable is to avoid repetition. If we didn't use a variable, we would have to do something like this. And when we refresh the page, of course it's the same output, but we now have repetition, which is not good practice. Repetition is never good practice. This also teaches us that we can use JavaScript to update styles. We will see more examples of those as we go on. Now let's try something else. Here, I'm creating a variable called myParagraph, and I'm assigning its value to the output of the query selector function. In this case, we're passing p to query selector, which means that we will get a paragraph. And again, if we update the text content to something like hello world, when I refresh the page, I see that our paragraph has changed to hello world. Notice that in this case, we retrieve the paragraph and we set its value to hello world, but it's only the first paragraph. That's because by default, the function query selector will return the first paragraph it sees in the HTML document. Let's look at it differently. If we wanted to get all p elements in the page, we'd have to use a new function, document.querySelector all p. And in this case, we get all the p elements in the page. Let's do alert myParagraphs.length. Length is a property that's available on all collections, and as the name implies, it tells us the length of the collection, or in other words, the number of elements in the collection. So if we come here and refresh the page, this page says 3. And if we come here to our index.html, we have 1, 2, and indeed 3 paragraph elements. So this myParagraphs is all the p elements available in our page. We can also select an element by its class. We don't always have to say query selector and pass a p. Here I'm declaring a variable named mySkills, and this time we're using document.querySelector, and instead of passing p or h1, we're passing .skills. Now .skills here tells query selector function we want to get the first element that has this skills class. And if we look at our HTML, we see that here we have this heading that has a skills class. So let's change its color like this. Again, we're accessing the style property of the HTML element, and then we're accessing the color property of the style, and we're setting its value to RGB to 5500. If we refresh the page, we see that sets our skills header to red. Let's look at another way of selecting an element. This time by an ID. We have this paragraph here. It has the ID additional info. Here we're declaring a new variable called myInfo, and we're calling the query selector function, and this time we're passing hash additional info. Let's do something like this. Again, we're accessing the style property of myInfo, then we're accessing the padding property of the style and setting its value to 30. If we refresh the page, we see that we have a big padding here. Now let's do something interesting. I want to introduce dark mode into this page. First, let's add a class to our body and call it dark mode. And let's add the necessary styles to accomplish dark mode. To do that, let's come up to our styles.css file and let's add this style. Here we're basically saying the background color is black and the color of the text is white, and for this color here we're just going to use a lighter shade of black. So now if I refresh the page, we see that we have a dark mode here. But now if we want to switch dark mode, we could come up here and remove this class. And now when we refresh, we don't get dark mode. Of course, this is not very useful because the user doesn't change the HTML of the page. We want to add a way to make the user able to switch dark mode on or off, and for that, let's introduce a new HTML element. Let's come up to the bottom of our page here and add a new element, button, and let's say here toggle mode. If we refresh our page, we see that we have a button here, but it doesn't do anything. So to make the button functional, I'm gonna add the functionality so we see it in action, and then we'll explain it bit by bit. Let's add on click equals toggle dark mode, and let's come to our JavaScript here, and I'm just gonna paste this code. Now when we refresh the page, if I click toggle mode, we get dark mode. If I click it again, we get the normal mode, dark mode, normal mode. Now what exactly did we do here? On click here is called an event. Basically, we're saying whenever this button is clicked, call this JavaScript function. And this is the function that we created. And this is how you define the function in JavaScript. You use the keyword function. We then give the function a name, and then we use the parentheses here. Then we use the curly bracket. This indicates the beginning of the function, and we use a closing curly bracket to indicate the end of the function. Inside the function, we're creating a variable using the var keyword, which is just another way of creating variables. Earlier, we've seen the const keyword for creating variables. Now we're using the var keyword, which we use when we're inside the function. The body element is a property of the document, so we can straight ahead say document.body, which now gives us the whole body of the page inside of this body element. Now the body element has a property called class list, and this property class list has a function called toggle, and here we're passing dark mode. What this line of code here is saying, for the body, toggle the class dark mode. Toggle it means if it exists, remove it. If it doesn't exist, add it. So the end result, whenever we click the button, this function looks at the body element here and says, does it have a class called dark mode? If yes, it removes it. If no, it adds it. And that's how we can accomplish the toggle mode. And we can actually see that in the developer tools. This is our body. It doesn't have any class right now. Now if we click toggle mode, we see that the body had the class dark mode, and hence we have the dark mode. And if we click toggle dark mode again, we see that it doesn't have any class, and hence we don't have any dark mode. Now let's make this even more interesting by actually changing the content of the button. If the screen is bright, I want this button to say dark mode. And if the page is dark, I want it to say light mode. Let's see how we can do that. I'm gonna make the code changes. We see their effect. Then we'll come back and explain exactly what we did. And when we refresh the page, now, what exactly did we do here? First, we changed the text of the button to say dark mode, because by default our page is light, so we want the button to initially say dark mode. Then we added an ID to the button, dark mode button. Next, we made a few modifications to our function here. First, we created a variable button and assigned its value to the dark mode button using the query selector button hash dark mode button. This also tells us that query selector can accept multiple selectors for more specificity. So remember, we said query selector returns the first matching element. So if we have more than one button and we just pass button, we'll get the first button only. But when we also add the dark mode button ID, that ensures we only get that button. We're creating a new variable, class name equals body.className. So that means after we toggle the dark mode, we then get the applied class to the body. This if statement here is what we call branching in computer science. Basically, we're saying if the class name is dark mode, change the text of the button to light mode using the text content property. Else, set the text content property on the button to dark mode. And this is how when the page is light, the button says dark mode, and when we press it, it turns into dark, but the button content also says light mode now. And if we press it, it now says dark mode. I want to add a new feature to our page using our newly discovered JavaScript powers. I want to add an input field here for a user to enter a secret word, and when the user enters the correct secret, I want to add a special element to the page here. I'm gonna make the change, see it in action, then we're gonna explain just exactly what we did. First, we added this James Bond image and we added it to the h1 element, and this teaches us h1 element doesn't only have to contain text, it could also have an image. We add an image by using the img tag, and the image tag has the property src that points to the source of the image. In this case, jamesbond.png, which is the image that we just uploaded. We're adding the HTML attribute hidden equals true, so that we don't want this image to be shown by default. Next, we added an input field using the input HTML element. The input field has an HTML attribute placeholder that we use to write a hint to the user as to what the user should do, and we give this input a class secret. Then we added a button, and the button content says verify secret, and for the on-click event of the button we assign the function verify secret. Verify secret is a small function that first defines a variable secret using the document.query selector, and it passes .secret, meaning give me the element with the secret class, in this case the input. Then it inspects the secret.value, meaning the value of the input element. If the value is 007, we create a new variable called bond image using the document.query selector image, and this selects this image right here. We then set the hidden property of the image to false, which means the image is not hidden, else we're alerting nice try in a sarcastic way. And what all of this leads to is this new functionality. Now if I enter the correct secret and click verify secret, the bond picture here 007 and the gun appear. If I don't know the secret and I'm just trying to guess anything and say the secret is open sesame, for example, click verify secret, tells me nice try. Okay, maybe the secret is 1 2 3 4, verify, nice try again, until I enter 007, click verify, then the image shows. This brings us to the end of the tutorial. I hope you had fun and learned something new. If you found this useful, please leave a like and consider subscribing to the channel. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. I hope to see you in the next one. Thank you for watching.